Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening. My name is Lauren Artilles, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard University Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, I'm honored to introduce this virtual event with ALAN LIGHTMAN presenting his latest book, Probable Impossibilities, Musings on Beginning and Endings, in conversation with Janna Levin, with a special introduction by Harvard's own Melissa Franklin. I hope you're all well and safe on this very windy day in Boston. Thank you so much for joining us virtually. Tonight's event is the latest installment in our Harvard Science Book Talk series, which works to bring the authors of recently published science literature to our Cambridge community and beyond. Coming up in the series on Tuesday, March 9th at 6 p.m., we'll host celebrated cosmologist Chanda Prescott-Weinstein for her new book, The Disordered Cosmos, in conversation with author Kiese Lehman. To learn more about this and other upcoming virtual events, you can visit harvard.com and sign up for our email newsletter, or check out the page harvard.com/science for more info. We also have a Science Research Public Lectures YouTube channel where you can view previous talks that you might have missed. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. So if you have a question for our authors at any time during the talk tonight, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. In the chat, I'll be posting links to purchase Probable Impossibilities on harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore. So thank you so much. Thank you to our partners at Harvard University, and thank you to all of you for showing up and tuning in support of authors, publishers, indie bookselling, and especially for science, because it really, really matters in this difficult time and always. Finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings over this past year, technical issues may arise. So if they do, we'll do our best to resolve them as quickly as possible. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And now I am excited to turn things over to my partner in the Harvard Science Book Talk series, renowned experimental particle physicist and Harvard physics professor, Melissa Franklin. The digital podium is all yours, Melissa.
Hi. Hello. Hi, I'm very pleased to be here tonight to introduce you to two very special colleagues of mine. ALAN LIGHTMAN, professor of the practice of the humanities at MIT, astrophysicist, author, poet, activist, who's written a lovely new collection of essays named Probable Impossibilities, Musing on Beginnings and Endings. And Janna Levin, who's a professor and a theoretical cosmologist at Barnard College and author most recently of Black Hole Survival Guide. And you can watch Janna's book talk in the same series, the same Harvard book talk series on the YouTube channel about the Black Hole Survival Guide. Janna also serves as science director of Pioneer Works in Brooklyn, New York, where she programs an incredible array of wonderful conversations about science between scientists and other people. She's going to be in conversation with Professor Lightman. So ALAN LIGHTMAN, who was born in Memphis, Tennessee, he was born there, and although he's been in the Northeast through his undergraduate at Princeton, a little bit to California for his graduate school at Caltech, but then back to Cornell, to the Northeast to Cornell, for a postdoc, and then teaching at Harvard and MIT. You can still detect a little bit of a Memphis accent, you'll see. At some point in his academic career, he started publishing poems, which is an early hint that he didn't consider the two cultures to be so distinct. ALAN LIGHTMAN has written some 6 novels, a book of poems, a collection of essays, among other many, many scientific papers. He manages to include among his works books like The Problem Book of Relativity and Gravitation, along with the poetry book Song of Two Worlds. He's also the founder of Harpswell, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to advance a new generation of women leaders in Southeast Asia. I started reading his new book, Probable Impossibilities, the other day, and was immediately reminded of why I like reading his work so much. His essay on Between Nothingness and Infinity managed to introduce a new way of thinking about the Big Bang to me, a geometric way. This is a testament not only to his easy and excellent manner of writing, but also to his very refreshing way of thinking about things. Especially for scientists, reading what a colleague thinks or the way they think about something you have studied for years or thought about many times, or for which you have worked out the equations in a problem set, to see it anew through his eyes, said in a different way, is exciting and really the source of much pleasure. I wish there were more scientists, writers like him and Janna. Anyhow, to say I couldn't put it down isn't exactly right, because you have to put it down to think about the way he sees things and compare to your own and wonder about how it is that even though the equations are there, the same equations, the way we see things is very individual. For instance, he talks in this essay about Blaise Pascal, the mathematician, and he's talking on along, and I'm thinking, yep, I recognize that. And then all of a sudden he says, well, you know what T.S. Eliot says about Blaise Pascal? And I thought, no, I really don't know what T.S. Eliot says. And I'm very happy to know. So this is the joining of poetry and science. I'm just so happy Alan tells us about the way he thinks, and I'm looking forward to hearing both Alan and Janna tonight.
Thank you, Melissa. Alan, wait, I have to see you properly. I don't have my gallery view set. I have to say, can we take a second to talk about how great Melissa is?
Yes.
So I first saw Melissa when I was an undergraduate, and she almost hit a bunch of like professors in the front row with a stick once. She's a real inspiration. So thank you, Melissa. That was really, really awesome. Alan, so you and I have been talking about how to have this conversation and, you know, a little bit interview, a little bit conversation. I have really been enjoying your book. And this is really special for me because, as Melissa said, a lot of people have read your fiction. And a lot of people have read your nonfiction, but how many people have read, you know, the problem book in general relativity and gravitation?
God help them.
I love that book. It's so you, like, imagine an astronaut floating and his friend passes on a circular orbit and they measure different times. It's poetic. You somehow even imbued poetry in that book.
Well,
Let's talk about this one. Probable Impossibilities. I think that this book is so interesting to me because it feels so thoughtful and so carefully curated. And I wanted to ask you just from the outset, what were you selecting? What was your guiding principle in this book? Because it's a bunch of different themes, but somehow it's coherent. So what was your guiding principle in thinking about this book?
my guiding principle, I think, was to explore the two infinities, the infinity of the small, which Melissa works on, and the infinity of the large, which you work on. And where do we human beings fit in between? And when we talk about where we fit in between, it's not just physically, but sort of in a human sense, a psychological sense. So that's why a few of the essays are about memory and consciousness, because that is also what determines who we are.
We're in total synchronicity here because look what I pegged. Look what I dog-eared. Page 5. You were talking about the atomic, the never-ending small, and the never-ending large. And then you say, in this one sentence, so beautiful, between these two endpoints of the imagination are we human beings, fragile and brief, clutching our thin slice of reality. So beautiful. But I feel like that's the whole book.
Well, thank you, Janna.
That's what the book is about, really, right? In some sense, or am I projecting?
No, that's what the book is about.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And, you know, it's really interesting that you mention this consciousness and, you know, you and I have spent a lot of time on space-time. I really did study you. I've been through every problem in that book, the problem book of general relativity and gravitation. And I really want to talk to you about consciousness. What
Right.
is your interest in consciousness? Why are you interested in consciousness? You are a, skilled mathematician, skilled physicist. Why this redirect? What does it mean for you? What does it represent?
It's one of the great mysteries of science. And even the top neuroscientists don't understand how this mysterious first person experience of being conscious in the world, of having an I, an ego, of being a separate being, how does that emerge from material, gooey neurons?
Right.
So it's philosophers and psychologists and neuroscientists alike are all stumped by how to explain that. And it's amazing to me, with all of the advances that we've made in science, and we understand DNA, we understand relativity, we understand quantum physics, we still don't understand the most bedrock experience we have, which is consciousness.
Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting that we're constantly explaining to each other our own minds? That's like basically all of human relationships.
Yeah.
I felt like,
Yes.
right? It is fascinating that we really take this so seriously, whether we have a scientific perspective on it or not. We take it very seriously, that we have a mind and our mind is meaningful. Now,
Well,
no, please, Alan.
Well, I mean, we should take it seriously, because that's our existence. That's how we are in the world.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that this is, you say this beautiful thing, you say, it's okay that it's just biology. You say something to the effect, if consciousness is an illusion, I'm okay with that. I'll take it. Can you help the rest of us get to that point?
Well, my view is that somehow or another, consciousness is the sensation, is the name that we give to the sensation of all of these electrical and chemical exchanges between neurons. And it's okay with me if there's some things that we don't fully understand. In fact, one of the most beautiful lines that's ever been written by either a scientist or a poet was written by Einstein, and I'm sure you know the line: "The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
It stands at the cradle of true art and true science."
Mm-hmm.
And I, for one, hope that that science never understands everything, that we never understand what makes two people fall in love. I hope that remains a mystery, not only because it's more fun when there are things that we don't know, but I think that also it provokes us. Mystery provokes us. It brings out our creativity. It challenges us.
So you're taking me out of order of my intentions, but you do this beautiful thing where you have a chapter that is an unrelenting, detailed exposition of electromechanical forces. The light hits this happens, the light is reflected, it's absorbed by this cell. The cell is shaped in this particular way to absorb the light. It's battering, and it's gorgeous. And then you say, molecules flow from one nerve ending to another. All of this is known. What is not known is why, after about a minute, the man walks over to the woman and smiles. I think that sums up why this book is so powerful. And what is it that makes you find this transition between the mechanistic, the scientific, which I know is beautiful and is beautiful, but that that's an insider thing.
Mhm.
It's an insider thing that we know that this is beautiful, and we understand not everybody wants to make that ascent. Not everybody wants to study physics and go through all of it. So what is that, do you think, that allows you to translate it over for people?
Well, I don't think there's anything magical
Mhm.
about it. I know that from a young age, I was interested in both the arts and the sciences. I wrote poetry, and I also built rockets that went through my neighbor's windows.
I'm going to tell them I'm going to tell them your number.
I would imagine that you did the same, Janna, because you're also a very poetic writer. And I didn't think there was anything unusual about having an interest in both the sciences and the arts. I think that a lot of young people, and I'm talking about children now, do have an interest and an appreciation of both science and art. And I think that our system of education, our parents, our teachers, sort of push us in one direction or the other, to be either the deliberate, quantitative, methodical, rational type of person, or to be the more spontaneous, intuitive kind of person. Life is just easier when you're one way or the other.
Yeah.
So I think I sort of came out as both at an early age.
Right. Let's talk about consciousness again, because I really appreciate you definitely enjoy ideas. Like, you want to celebrate ideas. I know I'm making you uncomfortable. Like, I'm viscerally understanding making you uncomfortable by flattering you. That's not what you enjoy. You enjoy ideas. And so when you were exploring these ideas of consciousness, you also have a line in there, which somebody said to you, which you clearly were researching people in this field, overrated. What did you think about that remark? And
Yes.
you're very careful in this book not to declare things, not to tell people what to think, right? You're struggling with the ideas yourself. You're putting
I don't tell people
into ideas.
I don't tell people what to think, because I don't know any of the answers.
Yeah.
But the person who said that consciousness is overrated was Robert DeSimone, who's a neuroscientist at MIT, very distinguished. And I was talking to him about some of the work that he did in neuroscience. And he studies how it is that our brain is able to pay attention to some things and ignore other things. And he found that when we're paying attention to things, that all the neurons in that area of the brain start firing in synchrony. It's a very important finding.
Fascinating.
And so I got around to the question of consciousness, which is what had been bothering me. And so I asked him, do we understand what consciousness is in the brain, and will we ever understand it? And he said that he thought that consciousness is overrated, that consciousness is just a name that we give to all of these sensations, and that eventually, when we understand more about how the brain works and how the neurons exchange signals and how memories are stored, that we won't be asking that question, what is consciousness? He said it's sort of like asking the question, where in a car is the speed located?
Interesting.
And of course, once you know about how a car runs, and you know how the engine works and the pistons go up and down and they move, they connect to crankshafts and they connect to gears, and eventually it connects to wheels and all of that.
Right.
You don't ask a silly question like, where is the speed located? So he thinks asking the question, what is consciousness, is a silly question, or will be viewed as a silly question.
Well, I've heard that before, and in the way that as physicists, we're really in pursuit of something magnificent. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of this ecstatic feeling. And then we get there and we think, it's still in my mind, right?
Well,
the beauty is still in my mind.
Well, the beauty's in my mind, but there is an external reality out there. I mean, we're able to land people on the moon.
Yeah. And I can pour coffee every day. I mean, I don't have to go that far.
Right. And so we're able to make predictions of things that turn out to be true. So it's not all in our mind.
It's not.
Yeah.
But the glory of it, the ecstasy of it, is maybe solely in our minds.
Well, that's why it's good that we're here as conscious beings to observe this spectacle of the cosmos. If there were no conscious beings in the universe, then all of these beautiful things would go unnoticed. In fact, there would be no entity to declare them beautiful.
So let's talk about that. Do you believe that there are universes in which there are no entities to declare them beautiful?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so one other thing I noticed about the book is that each chapter claims to be about a specific thing, but is actually about everything in the book. So every chapter is about everything in the book. And I really love that. I think it's really subtle and I think it's really, really beautiful. But you do have chapters that are, face front about the Big Bang or about infinity or about the stuff that you and I basically, have devoted our time to. And so what are your ideas on the new Big Bang variants? Can you walk us through them and what your opinion is on them?
Well, I think cosmologists and physicists, of course, you understand this very well, Janna, and Melissa understands it well too, have been able to work out pretty reliably what happened in the first few seconds.
And can we just say how unbelievable that is?
It is unbelievable.
I mean, unbelievable. Like my grandmother was 103 when she died. She was born before they knew there were galaxies out there other than ours. And she died knowing about the Big Bang. I mean, that's unbelievable.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's totally mind-blowing that we on our one planet, which is in one solar system, which is on the edge of one galaxy, which is one galaxy in 100 billion in the observable universe, and we're only like 2 meters tall, that we've been able.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not. Just okay. For the record.
Well, I won't talk about how much we weigh in kilograms. But it's pretty amazing. It's unbelievable that we were able to know as much about the universe at vast stretches of time.
Yeah,
but we still don't know. And of course, there's a lot that we don't know, probably more that we don't know than what we know is what happened at t=0. What brought the universe into existence. And there are various hypotheses and theories about that. Probably quantum physics was involved. I mean, almost certainly.
Yeah.
But these are theories that we have that probably we will never be able to test. And this brings up one of the problems of modern physics with not only cosmology, but string theory and other areas that are on the edge of physics, that we now have gotten to a point in physics where our theories far outstrip our ability to test.
Right. Do you think that makes it unscientific?
Well, that's the question.
I mean, I don't think it's like, imagine the far future if the universe expands forever and a civilization survives on another planet and they've never seen another galaxy because they're simply too far away.
Yeah.
Does it make it unscientific to pontificate about galaxies? I mean, I don't know.
No,
I'm not comfortable with that.
I think that we understand galaxies pretty well.
We do, but what if an advanced civilization, or not an advanced, a future civilization had never seen another galaxy and they
I've never
simply
seen
moved
another
over
gal-
it
Oh,
because the universe expanded so much that
Right.
the light never made it to them and they never saw another
Right, yeah,
galaxy?
right.
Like, wouldn't it be okay to say that it's scientific to pontificate about the existence of other galaxies? You know,
Yeah.
I think that's
so.
scientific.
I think so.
Mhm.
There's a narrow definition of what constitutes science by the philosopher Karl Popper,
Right.
said that if it's a statement that you can't falsify, that you can't prove wrong, then it's not science.
Right. Which is, I think, over like, I appreciate the sentiment. I don't even think Popper would defend it in this
It's
setting.
overly cautious. The way that I think about it is if there are theories where we can test part of the theory,
Mhm.
and then the part that we can test implies that there's something else, then we tend to believe it. It's like if you were in a room and you saw a lion's tail underneath coming under the door, and it would be a pretty good bet that there's a lion on the other side
Right.
of the
Are you
door.
not going to hustle your kids out of there?
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
You're gonna run.
it's not scientific. I'm not going to hustle my kids out of here.
You're going to run for cover.
So some of the ideas you float, which again, you don't really badger people to believe one way or another, are things like multiverse, the multiverse hypothesis, which I would appreciate if you talked us through, and also things like Andre Linde's notions on the origin of the universe, essentially, which is what they really are. And you talk about it in part in terms of scientific ambition, but also maybe it's right.
Right.
Maybe
Well,
it's true.
Since you asked me to, I will say a word about the multiverse. The multiverse is this hypothesized collection of many, many, many universes in addition to ours. And to be called a universe, you have to be out of contact with other universes. So these other universes, we can never communicate with them in the infinite future. And that's why they're called separate universes. And he hypothesizes this because one of his, I shouldn't say, the multiverse idea explains some weird things about our universe. And also it's predicted by some theories of cosmology.
Yeah.
But it's untestable.
Is it totally untestable? Like, do you think if somebody discovered that there were small extra spatial dimensions, would that be a significant enough clue that there were large dimensions, like the kind of, the origami of like balloons?
Right.
If I squeeze in this direction, it means that's large, like that there's a relationship between the small and the large.
Well, I think
do you think that would be sufficient evidence to take seriously the multiverse?
Well, it would certainly be sufficient evidence to take seriously string theory.
Mm-hmm. Which predicts multiple dimensions, which predicts also the unpredictability of the constants.
Yes, it does. But we have to tell our listeners that these small dimensions are billions and billions and billions of times smaller than the center of an atom, and billions and billions of times smaller than the smallest particles that Melissa Franklin has been able to test with her accelerator in Geneva, Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems it would take an accelerator, I don't know exactly what the size of it, probably an accelerator from here to the moon to accelerate particles up to a high enough energy where they could probe these dimensions we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. So,
That's
given
why
that might be the case, that's just human limitation.
Yeah.
How far are you willing to go in terms of your own theorizing about what what the theory of space-time is? Are you just going to call it like, I'm not willing to say more than that? Or what, like in your heart, do you think there are other universes like there are other solar systems? I love it. I love it. I got a long pause from Alan Lightman.
I think I would bet money that there are not, but I wouldn't bet a lot of money.
Fascinating.
Maybe $10.
Fascinating. Well, if there are other universes, in one of them, you have millions.
Right.
So let me ask you at this juncture, if you don't mind, I warned you I would ask you this. Would you mind reading a short passage just to give us a sense of the tone of the book?
Okay. Well, I'm going to read a very short passage. And I'm going to read only a short passage because we don't have billions of years for this. I will tell you a thing that is both impossible and true. You were born from a tiny seed within your mother, and she was born from a tiny seed within her mother, and she from her mother, and so on back and back through the dim hallways of time until we arrive at a particular cave in Africa, 100,000 years in the past, with a particular woman sitting by a fire. That woman knew nothing of cities or automobiles or electricity, but if we could follow her daughters through time, we would eventually arrive at you. And if each of those daughters had pressed an inky thumb on a large piece of parchment, one following the other, there would today be several thousand thumbprints on that parchment, leading from that ancestral woman 100,000 years ago to your thumbprint today.
It's beautiful. It's something I've wanted to ask you ever since I've known you. You present as spiritual. I mean, maybe that's unfair for me to say. You present to me as spiritual. And I confess before this book, I wasn't really sure about your stance on religion. And you even have a previous book, Searching for Stars on an Island in Maine, where you really don't quite declare your stance. It's very subtle. And in this book, you come out as an atheist. And I want to say that I think a lot of people listening want to understand. I mean, maybe even they want to know that there's an alternative to religiosity, because, you know, this book is really all about meaning. I mean, in my opinion, again, please forgive me if I'm projecting, and there's a lot of meaning in this book. And I think that people are looking for alternatives to religiosity. Would you mind speaking to that?
Well, I believe that you can be, I consider myself to be a spiritual person. I'll say that. Mm-hmm. And I think that we've all had transcendent experiences, what we might call transcendent experiences, where we just feel connected to something much bigger than ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I consider that to be part of spirituality. And you may or may not believe in God to have those experiences. You don't need to, or you may. I consider myself also to be a materialist. I think that we're all atoms and molecules, and there's no ethereal essence beyond that. But I think that those atoms and molecules are capable, when they're in the right arrangement, to do amazing, spectacular things.
I mean, how is that not enough?
That's enough for me.
How is that not enough? Like, talking about how the atoms align, and it's clearly just factual relationships between the forces, and still this.
Yes.
How is that not a lot?
It's plenty
to
enough for me.
delight in.
Yeah.
Agreed. In fact, speaking of life, one of the things that you tap into that also fascinated me, I got really fascinated by Craig Venter and some of the crazy antics that he got up to. So here's a geneticist who basically cloned his own genome, and he has inserted artificial genome, slightly modified from the animal kingdom, into another cell and reanimated it. So we have so sophisticated. I mean, just like way over here in terms of synthetic biology. What I really enjoyed is that you wrote about, well, what about simple biology? Because like, why did we skip that step?
Yeah.
How did life emerge? And there's a terrific chapter in the book about, well, I just start with some, chemicals like in beakers, how did that happen? And that's actually something we seem to have skipped almost intellectually. That's a fascinating chapter. Who was the person who spoke to at Harvard again? Remind me of his name.
His name was Jack Szostak.
That's the proper pronunciation. I would have said it wrong. That's actually why I tricked you into saying
it. He's a professor of genetics at the Harvard Medical School, and he's interested in how life originated. So unlike people like Craig Venter, who start with biological molecules that have already had millions and billions of years to evolve, and then use those to coax a cell into doing something unusual. He starts with the chemicals that were present in the primitive Earth, called I think they call them prebiotic. There isn't millions of years of biology. We're starting with the primitive Earth with methane and ammonia in the atmosphere and all of that stuff. And he's interested in seeing, with those primitive chemicals, how did the first living organism come about?
And how?
Well, he and other people have made a lot of progress. The biologists believe that the first reproducing molecule was not DNA, but RNA.
Which is a single strand.
RNA is a single strand of amino acids. We're all familiar with it from the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. And he and other biologists have been able to have RNA formed out of just primitive chemicals if you have the right catalyst around. And he's also been able to make cell compartments or cell walls form from primitive chemicals. So he believes that the first life was a piece of RNA inside a cell wall with enough chemicals around it so that it could manufacture copies of itself. And he has gotten pretty far along on that path. Where he's stuck right now is that he can't get the RNA to reproduce itself, which would be necessary.
Don't you think it is an absolutely criminal construct that academics are separated from each other? Because can you imagine if just free-floating conversations, we could talk about electromagnetism? I mean, basically all of biology is electromagnetism right now. It really is. It's all high potentials, low potentials, how charges flow. What would happen if we were allowed? I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say allowed. Obviously, nobody forbade us. But, given the inspiration to cross-communicate, just to discuss, well, it's probably has to do with how electrons flow. Probably, right? What's the least path of resistance for an electron? That's your mechanism.
Yeah, but Janna, I think it's a lovely idea to have physicists and chemists and biologists talking to each other. But I think that you're not going to be able to figure out this problem of how life arose by just tracking electrons flowing across potentials. That it's happening. It's like figuring out quantum physics from starting with the uranium atom instead of with the hydrogen atom.
Mm-hmm. So, thinking about quantum mechanics, you also talk about that. You talk about the quantum revolution. And isn't it amazing to you that it's still an unsolved mystery or understanding of quantum mechanics, that it's the weirdest thing in the world because we can use it and we can use it really powerfully, but we actually don't understand it?
Well, I think the reason why we don't understand it is because our whole sense of reality is based on our large macroscopic size.
Right.
And the world in which quantum effects are large, which is the world of the atom and smaller, are just not available to our sensory perception. I mean, this is one of the great triumphs of, or you can say tragedies of modern physics, is in the 20th century, is discovered that our sensory perceptions are giving us a false sense of reality.
But why have we done so well with relativity, but not with quantum mechanics? Like nobody is saying relativity is incomprehensible. Nobody is saying that. And it is also, as you're describing, beyond the range of our senses. Yet quantum mechanics remains tricky.
Well, it's a good question. I think that for me, the possibility of an object being in two places at once is harder to wrap my head around than the idea that clocks in motion with respect to each other can tick at different rates.
Do you think that's because one theory is more thoroughly developed than the other? I mean, do you think that it's a reasonable test to say its incomprehensibility is a flaw?
Well, I think that quantum physics is as well developed as relativity. For some reason or another, it's less intuitive. I mean, as you say, both of them are not intuitive, but
I don't lose sleep at night over relativity. Nobody's asking, what did Einstein mean?
Yeah,
it's real smooth.
Yeah. Well, it could be also that there are various interpretations of quantum physics of what it means. And there's only one interpretation of relativity theory. Quantum mechanics, for some reason, seems to merge much more closely with philosophy and even theology and relativity theory. So that might be what makes it richer and more baffling.
Can I ask you, what is it that keeps you up at night? What are you meditating? Oh, I also want to mention, sorry, I really have to mention this. There's this passage where you describe your childhood home, and there's not a lick of science in it. It's an entire chapter. And like a great novelist, I really am not going to quote the specific line, because although that's, high art, it's the impact. I don't need to know the exact line. I walked away with this phrasing, thick slabs of air in place of your house. Like I totally got that. And I want to ask you about dropping that in the middle of the book.
Well, this is an experience that I had a few years ago. My father had passed away. My mother had passed away earlier, and I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was going back to Memphis to see the house that I grew up in with my brothers. And when I got to the street where the house was, the house wasn't there.
And you had no idea?
I didn't know that it wasn't going to be there. And I walked around in the area, the 3,000 square feet where it had been. When you see a place where a house has been, it strikes you as how small an area it is, because there's so much life that happens in a house, and you can't believe that all of that life was squeezed into 3,000 square feet. It just seems incomprehensible. And I had all these memories of growing up, because I spent my entire youth there from age 0 to 18. All the memories that I had came flooding through me, and I just couldn't believe that there was just empty space there. The reason why I put that in the book is because it has to do with how we construct reality from memory, from our memories. And the book is also about consciousness. And I think that part of what constitutes our consciousness and our self-awareness, our self-identity, is our memories. Who we were, what we did, the good things we did, the bad things we did.
Those bad things. Oh, those bad things.
And to have the house where you grew up in and all of those memories just taken away from you, it's like cutting a piece of yourself, of your memory, out of you.
It was so interesting to me, not that you wrote it, but that you included it in this book. And I think that's what's special about it, because the book is about meaning, right? It's about deriving meaning. And in the last question I have, because I was irresponsibly charged with timing this event, which is not a good idea. But in my last question, when I have you to myself before I open it to Q&A, there is this idea in physics that we are only our interactions. That's all we are. I mean, how would you even say something existed if it did not interact? I mean, when we talk about quantum mechanics, we talk about its mass, its various charges. Other than that, there is no meaning to a thing. There is no meaning to anything outside of its interaction rules to some extent, its quantum numbers. And somehow philosophically, I feel like you are also interacting, right? You're thinking about this.
Well, I think metaphorically, I like that idea because you can extend that up to our scale and say that the meaning of our lives is how we interact with other people, and I do think that that's what gives life its meaning. It's about connections. I wanted to say before we open up for Q&A that it is a real treat and a delight to have Janna Levin with me. She is an incredibly creative and talented person, not just as a scientist, but as a writer. Your latest book, because you've written a bunch, How to Survive a Black Hole or something, the Black Hole Survival book or something is
Black Hole Survival Guide. You need it. You need it to survive.
We need it, but it's very poetic and lyrical and whimsical, so it's a real pleasure for me to be with you, Janna. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I'm going to hide behind my cup now. And also, when I started at MIT, you had just left the physics department to go into the humanities. You were the first person to have a joint appointment, which was clearly my aspiration. And so you don't know, I've been dogging you for a long time. Alan, thank you so much. This is so beautiful. I'm so excited. I have the Q&A is up and live. Let me try to, oh God, I don't want to get too close to my computer to read these. Okay. Could you speak to the difference between consciousness and self-consciousness, self-awareness? It feels as if there is a significant difference here. Dogs, for example, oh God, I love dogs, are conscious. For example, it's not clear whether they are self-aware. I do think that's a very interesting question.
Yeah. Well, of course, defining what consciousness is partly arbitrary. It's a matter of definition. But I include self-awareness as what is part of the definition of consciousness. And dogs are certainly self-aware. They recognize themselves in a mirror.
Do they?
I think they do. Dolphins
do.
Dolphins do, and dolphins don't have.
Diana Reese does a lot of research on dolphins looking at themselves in the mirror, and they literally check themselves out. They're like vain. They're like, how do I look from this angle?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, there'll probably be some experts who have to answer the question for dogs, but anyway, it's a good question.
I mean, dogs are interesting, right? Because why do we want to engage in a relationship with an animal that is so close to our level of consciousness, but not quite, right? Like, why is that interesting to us? It's a delightful relationship.
They're not going to complain and ask you to take out the trash.
They are so goddamn loving. As you're both scientists and novelists, are there any authors in sci-fi or any genre whose work incorporates or explores scientific concepts through fiction in a way you find exciting? Are you kidding? I love novelists who write about science. Alan.
I do too. And I was thinking of Richard Powers as one person. I love his work.
There's, I mean, even like Pulitzer Prize winner Colson Whitehead, who is known for the Underground Railroad, writes beautiful, like speculative fiction. Beautiful. And it's really interesting that it's an undervalued art form, because I can name like 5 Pulitzer Prize winners, all of whom won prizes for books that were not speculative fiction. But in my mind, their best books are the speculative fiction books. Charles Yu won the National Book Award for Interior Chinatown, which is probably great. I haven't read yet, but also wrote How to Live Safely in a Sci-Fi Universe. Do you know that book? It's a great book. So a lot of these really literary people are great writers, and they write about science.
Mm-hmm.
Please, Alan, you were about to say, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I
was on a rampage. Jennifer Egan, Jonathan Lethem. God, I could go on for a long time. Yes, I love that stuff. And Alan, as a novelist, you've never written sci-fi, but your work, which I'm not really drawn to sci-fi either, but your work is, you write about science in fiction.
Yeah, and that's different from science fiction.
Yeah. And how did you come to that? Because really, you kind of broke the mold with Einstein's dreams.
Well, I've always been interested in creative writing, and the way that I got to writing fiction about science is I started stretching the boundaries of the essay. I was writing essays in the early 1980s, probably before you were born, and
yeah, totally.
And and I began putting imaginative and fictional elements into the essay, and eventually that led to full-blown fiction. So,
well, Einstein's dreams really is special. I mean, don't you also marvel at its endurance?
I do.
It's 20, 30 years.
I'm surprised.
And it remains a classic. I mean, mazel.
Well,
So here's another question. What is the biggest misconception or most unbelievable theory you've encountered about the universe? Jesus, we entertain the most insane stuff. I don't even know where you're going to start.
The multiverse, by far.
You don't believe it. You don't buy it.
Well, I'm not sure, but the idea that there are zillions of other universes out there that probably we can't prove, that takes a huge amount of faith, and it shows a commitment of scientists to a certain way of thinking, even when it goes possibly beyond science. So that's the most fantastic thing that I think that we entertain.
Do you think it's the most fantastic because it's the one you don't entertain? Whereas you entertain lots of fantastical things that other people don't entertain, which you are completely comfortable with? Extra dimensions, that kind of stuff.
Well, you have to admit that the invention of an infinity of other universes, most of which would be infinite in extent. So we have an infinity multiplied by infinity.
Right. So somewhere right now, this conversation is happening, but we're slightly different.
Right. Exactly.
Slightly different questions are coming in.
Right.
And who knows what the implication, the butterfly's wings.
Right. I mean, that's a lot of infinity.
Can we talk about infinity for a second? Because I really didn't ask you about it, but it's one of my favorite subjects. You don't seem that disarmed by infinity.
One thing I love about infinity is if you cut it in half,
it's still infinity.
And there's this mathematician, Hilbert, which you probably know this, who has this
the hotel?
Hilbert Hotel, but I'll just say what it is because I love it so much. So this traveler comes to this hotel late at night. He's tired. He's worn out. He's been walking 10 miles, hasn't had anything to eat. We can go on with the embellishment.
You got to add that.
So he gets to the hotel. It's the Infinite Hotel, and it's fully occupied.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really bummed out. So the hotel keeper says, "No problem. We'll just move the person who's in room number 1 into room number 2, and we'll move the person who's in room number 2 into room number 3, and so on. And everybody will be accommodated, and there'll be an empty room for you at the bottom."
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way the infinity is.
It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing.
Pretty awesome.
Everyone rolls over, and there's still a spot. What was the quote when Cantor started to develop these ideas about infinite sets, that Hilbert was going to roll over in his grave an infinite number of times? So I have another question. One of the recurring issues that arises in working with new teachers of pre-college science is the obviousness of certain scientific ideas, the obviousness in quotes, like the atomic nature of matter. I mean, can you imagine that being obvious 300 years ago? Incomprehensible.
I don't think it's even obvious now.
Not at all. And so the question goes on. As you write about, atoms were a long time coming, and the result of centuries of experiment and intellectual effort. Why does this beautiful and complex story get compressed in so many minds to the trivial and obvious? Is it just human nature to simplify, or is this ignorance necessary to scientific progress?
Are we talking about the teaching of the atom idea to high school students?
I think let's do it generally, because I think the future, there might not be these divisions of high school and college and whatever.
But we're talking about young people, right?
I think so. Yeah. From the question, I think so. Yeah.
Well, I think it's an incredible story how we came to the idea of the atom, both the original hypothesis by the ancient Greeks and then eventually the
incredible.
It's an incredible story.
Incredible. It's so not obvious. Look at me, I'm solid.
Yeah.
So not obvious.
I think that you could write a whole science course for the 8th grade just based on the discovery of the atom.
Oh my God.
And
yeah.
So I don't know why it's not done. It could be that maybe it's that we're trying to cover. We have this list of things that the state gives us. You've got to cover this whole list of A, B, C, D concepts in your science courses to be certified.
Look,
So they're not leaving room for sort of creative approaches. They being the state science board or whoever, educational board, whoever is in charge of this. That I think that there are a lot of creative ways of teaching science that we're not using.
Let me speak to a creative way to teach science. I have to read this. I didn't intend to do this, but I'm gonna have to read this. It's from Alan's book. You are talking about very scientific concepts, the atom, and then you write. It's pages 84 to 85. Anyone who's got the book, Many years ago, I took my 2-year-old daughter to the ocean for the first time. We parked our car some distance away beyond the sight of the water, and then walked across a broad sandy area, passing sand dunes, shells of crabs, piping plovers that ran and stopped, ran and stopped, ran and stopped. Eventually, we climbed over a sandy hill, and there was the ocean, stretching on and on until it merged with the sky. It was my daughter's first glimpse of infinity. For a moment, her face froze. Then she broke out in a big smile. So lovely. I think that kind of answers the question.
Yeah.
So
Well,
lovely.
I just noticed that the person who asked the question about teaching the atom was Philip Sadler.
Was it? Oh, I didn't even see.
Philip Sadler, who was a really outstanding science teacher himself, and has developed all kinds of innovative ways of teaching science to young people. So I turn the question back to Phil. You should write this book on the atom for high school students.
Awesome. I have one more question here, and then I think they're cutting us off. Oh, no, I have more maybe. Is it important to distinguish the edge of science and art? Why? Can't a scientist have beliefs that are not scientific? Does a scientist's beliefs have to be scientific? Complicated question.
Well, of course, we're all
Complicated
human
question.
beings, and we do plenty of things that are irrational as well as rational. That's what makes us human. But I think that it is important, even though we have these rational and irrational sides of ourselves, that we do have rational disciplines like science and like law, where we put on our rational hat and we use mathematics and other kinds of logic to arrive at things, which has allowed penicillin, antibiotics. It's allowed the development of the computer chip and the computers.
Mm-hmm.
So we do need that rational side of ourselves, and we need courses and education and professors who know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But we, at the same time, we can honor our irrational sides and accept the fact that we are complicated, fully dimensional people.
I have to say, though, I really think you exemplified the idea that there is at no point where rationality kills humanity. There is no point. That is a false idea, that there is no point of the murdering to dissect. That's not real. And you're the best at that. And it's such an important thing to be able to say, I am poetic. I have meaning. I'm searching for meaning, and I'm looking for it in these scientific ways. And never does science obstruct my search for meaning.
I second that. That might be a good place. That might be a good place for us to wrap up.
Lovely, lovely. Alan, such a pleasure. I can't
Pleasure.
wait to do this with you on your island in Maine.
Pleasure for me, Janna, as well.
Thank you both. I just want to thank you for that fantastic conversation and thank Melissa Franklin for her lovely introduction. And I want to thank all of you out there for spending your evening with us. Please learn more about this fascinating book and purchase Probable Impossibilities at harvard.com. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, all here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, have a good night, keep reading, and please be well. Thank you so much.